Over a year ago, I made a video about how Sony, along with many gamers, have been misrepresenting the Nintendo Switch's core audience and what that audience really truly was. The reason I addressed it then was because Sony's Jim Ryan stated that the Switch was after a more casual-oriented consumer, an opinion I felt at the time, at least, that many gamers also had of the platform. Now, you would think today in 2018, this isn't a mantra that people think about anymore. Unfortunately, the reputation is still out there. You know, the Switch, yeah, that's the system for kids. Now, I'll address the whole Nintendo is for kids debate at another time in another video, because that whole debacle would take too long to dive into right now. But I do want to touch upon the Nintendo Switch's target audience versus its actual audience, or whether or not those audiences are really the same thing. See, it's no secret in today's gaming landscape that the term hardcore gamer is often applied to people playing certain game types on certain systems, usually an Xbox, PC, or PlayStation, combined with a game that is intended for older audiences. I actually despise the term hardcore. I've talked about this in the past, but since Nintendo itself has been using it lately, we'll stick with it for the purpose of this video. See, an article recently cropped up by US Gamer that claimed the Switch is already a bigger success than the Wii. I know, that very thought sounded crazy to me too. But the premise in that piece wasn't that the Switch outsold and made more money than Wii, really one of the true measures of success, but rather that the way in which Switch has found its success is vastly different than Wii. And it did so by appealing to core and hardcore gamers. The evidence they use is the top seller chart for each platform. On Wii, you see titles like Wii Sports and Wii Fit and other Wii-style games topping the charts, the Just Dances and all of that. Or often, the more casually aimed Nintendo mainline franchises, like New Super Mario Bros. Wii, a game with 30 million in sales, while more hardcore games like Smash or Mario Galaxy don't even sell half as well. Comparatively, they point out how 11+ million people bought Super Mario Odyssey as the best-selling game on Switch to date, which means that more than half of Switch owners bought that title, an attach rate Sony could only dream of, as they put it, for most of their titles. Then they follow that up by pointing out how Mario Kart is also hitting at around half of the total Switch audience, and that Breath of the Wild not really being that far behind either, also reaching almost half of the Nintendo Switch audience. You'd be hard-pressed to find a Switch owner that doesn't own 1, 2, or even all 3 of those games. The premise here is that the Wii found its success by appealing to flash-in-the-pan consumers that grab onto trends and rarely stay loyal to a device or company once the trend passes, whereas Switch has found its success by appealing to a more core, or really hardcore audience of gamers, the ones who, yes, do stick around, as long as you keep delivering. The PlayStation 4, as an example, is able to maintain its audience and continue to grow at a rather large rate, even 5 years in, because they keep delivering on those promises of epic experiences that can only be found on PlayStation. Once you grab that audience, you have to keep delivering. On this ground, I do agree with US Gamer that Switch has found more success than Wii in this regard, as Switch's audience is being built on the back of true blue gamers versus little kids and flash-in-the-pan consumers, audiences that are quite large and worthwhile for profits, but generally not a good long-term audience to invest in. As I sat there pondering on the differences in audiences today versus the Wii and DS era, I happened upon the following email. This email was sent by Nintendo to me. There is Nintendo in an email advertisement telling me to play games anytime, anywhere, indoors and out, on Switch. But not just any games, not your Zeldas, your Marios, your Donkey Kong Tropical Freezes of the world. Games they classify as hardcore. Wolfenstein 2, Bayonetta 2, Dark Souls, Skyrim, Doom. 5 games they have chosen to advertise in this email, along with a link to more hardcore Switch games. I could hardly believe my eyes. Since when did Nintendo ever advertise hardcore games in this matter? I had to think long and hard because they really haven't pushed this particular narrative since the 90s. Nintendo believes wholeheartedly that their system has a great library of hardcore games, so much so that they should advertise that fact proudly. US Gamer pointed out how Switch's audience is being built on the back of consumers that truly care about and invest heavily into gaming. Hardcore gamers. Games rated for adults. And an audience that has money and invests heavily into gaming, which again happens to also be adults. Switch's primary audience, according to Salesmetric and Nintendo themselves, is a more hardcore gamer adult demographic. Let that sink in for a moment. Now look, I have been with Nintendo and gaming on their platform for most of my 32 years on the planet. So I'm not sure I am the best sample case to use for this. I am also not saying that teenagers and, nay, children aren't attracted to the Switch. I know full well my own children, ages 2, 5, and 7, all want their own Switch to play with. But I often wonder, if they didn't see me playing on it, would they really want one? When I was a kid, the primary reason I got into video games was because I used to watch my dad play games like Super Mario Bros. And Mike Tyson's Punch-Out on the NES. All-time classics that at the time had enthralled my 20-something-year-old dad. Watching him play these games inherently made me want to play them, partly because as a kid you always latch onto that role model and want to be like them, but also because it felt like the cool and hip thing to do. Hey, if adults think this is awesome, then it obviously must be awesome, right? Fast forward today, and I'm already seeing a lot of correlations in my house. And this is probably true of other households, where Xbox is the top platform, or even PlayStation. Heck, my daughter's biological dad games on a PlayStation 4, and that has led directly to my daughter having an interest in playing PlayStation games, just like she has an interest in Nintendo games because of me. Absolutely nothing wrong with that, if you ask me. What I think has occurred the longer the Switch is on the market is that time and time again, it seems to reaffirm itself as a system that hardcore gaming adults really care about. Look at the sales of indie titles like Celeste, one of the best-selling digital games on the platform that also happens to be for a certain type of hardcore gamer player. In fact, almost all high-quality indie titles on Switch that require a higher level of skill in gaming seem to all sell extremely well on Switch, dwarfing the sales of even the combined efforts of PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. But why is that? Sure, it could be because the Switch does not have a full AAA game support in its catalog. That certainly helps. But it's also because the audience the Switch has garnered craves these more hardcore indie games. Hardcore games in general, really. Games you sink hundreds of hours into and require a higher skill ceiling. Nintendo tried to expand the audience this year into that old school Blue Ocean strategy with Nintendo Labo. While that has been a success overall, its success is pretty small in comparison to the more hardcore games. A staunch difference between an era built around appealing to such consumers with Wii and DS to today's Switch era. The hardest part, of course, in this realization for me that the Switch's audience is a pretty hardcore one has obviously been acceptance. Not from myself, but from others. While I think a lot of gamers do have respect for Nintendo and the Switch itself, within the community of Switch on YouTube, we do seem to run into a fair share of people trying to paint the Switch with a brush that doesn't actually fit the demographic that bought it. The Switch can't possibly appeal to the same type of consumer that also wants to buy Death Stranding and Uncharted on PlayStation, can it? That overlap simply can't exist. Or does it? I saw a statistic once that said 40% of Switch owners also own a PlayStation 4, 20% own a gaming PC, 15% own an Xbox One. Honestly, I don't know how true this statistic is because it was likely based on an arbitrary poll, but I personally fall into that category. I have an Xbox One. I have a 4K gaming PC, and I'm actually going to be firing up my early access to Madden 19 any moment now. And at some point this year, I was going to try and pick up a PlayStation 4 Pro to take advantage of my 4K gaming TV in my man cave and play all the major PlayStation 4 exclusives or PlayStation 3 ports I care about that I might have missed over the years, such as The Last Guardian and really the entire Uncharted series, or even diving deep into The Last of Us Remastered before the second game arrives, as I missed the first at the end of the PlayStation 3 era. I literally am the person they are talking about in these comparisons, a person interested in those games who also happens to own multiple platforms and prefers the more hardcore style of games on Switch. I own Wolfenstein 2 on Switch, and Doom, and Zelda, and Mario Odyssey and Splatoon 2, and ARMS, and Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Octopath Traveler, NBA 2K18, and the list goes on and on and on. All of these games with appeal to gamers that both have a lot of time to game and more so the money to spend on more hardcore investments. The more I think about it, the more evidence that is presented, the more I begin to realize that maybe using my own experiences isn't such a far-fetched metric to consider. The Nintendo Switch is specifically targeting, successfully so, more hardcore adult gamers. And honestly, that's just fine by me. I am Nathaniel Rufflejantz from Nintendo Prime, and I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on this op-ed, this opinion piece, this editorial style video in the comments below. I want to thank you guys for tuning in, and I will catch all of you in the next one.